somewhere energetically, you're putting your stake in the ground and you're inviting the universe to conspire in your favor to figure this out.
For so many years, women get called codependent and too attached or too emotional, too responsible for other people's feelings, and they label themselves people pleasers and, really are hard on themselves and see themselves in this way. But there's an interesting conversation to be had here about this word codependency. It's a topic actually that my audience has frequently asked me to talk more about. And I think, you know what? There's no better person to bring into this conversation than Terri Cole. So I'd love to have you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and about your books.
I've been a licensed psychotherapist for 28 years. Before that, I was a talent agent, negotiating contracts for supermodels and celebrities. So I've been in the world of highly visible people for a long time too, because then that sort of followed me into my practice. Everything that I write about, I just finished my 4th book that comes out in October. But everything I write about, my first book is about boundaries, called Boundary Boss. Then I did a Boundary Boss workbook. Then my second book is Too Much, which is about high-functioning codependency, which I think we're probably going to talk quite a bit about today. And then my next book, the last book that I owe my publisher, thank God, is called Father Wound. And I'm going to be talking about father wounds and the patriarchy and a whole bunch of things in that book that comes out in the end of October 2026. So the work that I do is predominantly through the lens of the female experience because it's what I know. And every single book I've ever chosen to write has been because, like with boundaries, I was a boundary disaster and became eventually a boundary master. But I realized whatever is causing me pain, whatever my challenges are, I'm not alone, right? There's hundreds of millions of women in the world who are having the same experience. And so my goal has always been to teach people anything that I can that will help them lessen their own suffering and elevate their own joy in this life. So it's really, really about self-empowerment. And I think that as women in particular, we get a bit of a raw deal the way that we are taught. Like when you really think about it, most of us were raised and praised to be self-abandoning codependents. Actually, that was our home training was the more selfless you are, the more pleasant you are, the nicer you are, the better. Now, I'm not saying be unpleasant or be unnice, but I am saying if we prioritize those things, we've really been set up and trained to be professional people pleasers. But eventually, that becomes very unpleasing to us. So that's basically me. I had a private practice for many years and started with a public platform, probably around 2011. And I started teaching online because there was such a need for what I was doing. This is before any books, because my first book came out in 2021. But I wondered, I know what I do in therapy with one-on-one people in my office. I know it works. Will it work virtually with groups? On the interwebs, I have no idea. So I beta tested a boundary course in 2015, took all the data, all the information that people gave me about what they wanted more of. They wanted it to be twice as long and a bunch of things. And I created one of my signature courses. It's called Boundary Bootcamp. And I realized that not only does it translate from the therapy room to a group of people, it was actually more powerful being with a group of people. So all of this compassionate witnessing that was happening within the group, people were just really transforming quickly. So anyway, I've been teaching, signature online courses from codependency to mother wounds, father wounds ever since. I've got a whole bunch of courses that I teach. And I have a course on high functioning codependency too that's starting today, actually.
Oh, perfect timing. I
Indeed.
love that though. What great work, because, I feel like I was stumbling through life, not knowing that I was self-abandoning. It didn't even occur to me that I had never even heard the phrase, in all honesty. And when I sort of started my own journey after an abusive relationship and learning, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of curiosity, what got me there, what made me think any of that behavior was normal? Why did I continue to try harder and just honestly self-abandon even more? That's when I started to learn about this. Now, the word codependency is just sort of you're codependent. I think it gets thrown around a lot.
Sure.
But I think more importantly is how do we become that? And I love what you said. It's not that it's men are never that. I also speak to women and I choose the same thing. It's my lived experience. That's why I choose to speak through this lens. I don't want to invalidate anybody else, but that's my experience. And I see more women as people pleasers than men. And I believe that it's social reasons for the most part and patriarchy and all those fun topics, not to get off topic. But I think that codependency also ignores power and context and safety. And, we need to be asking really a harder question, right? When does self-abandonment come from conditioning and when is it a response to coercive control?
I think that I would back it all the way up myself. So let's talk about codependency because I think it's, this is so relevant for your audience and honestly, so relevant for anybody because it's a relational problem, right? And we're all in relationships with people. So I'll tell you quickly the story about why I wrote the book Too Much, which is about stopping the cycle of high functioning codependency and why I coined the phrase high functioning codependency. So I have women like you and women like me. That's who my therapy practice has been for all these decades, which is highly capable women. So if I would observe a codependent pattern and I would say, hey, what you're describing is codependency, they would immediately reject the notion and say, dependent? Everyone's dependent on me. I'm doing all the emotional labor. I'm making all the cash. I'm moving all the pieces on the board. I'm making sure that everything gets done in the house. am keeping the boat afloat. So who am I dependent on? And I realized that my clients didn't know what codependency was. They were being unduly influenced by Melody Beatty, God rest her soul, codependent no more. I can't tell you how many women have said, I'm not involved with an addict. I'm like, you don't have to be though. So I knew it. There was this negative thing. And in my demographics specifically, they were very averse to the whole notion. So then I started doing research, just even my own research, my own clientele and my own life experience. And I realized, this is different. You don't have to be involved with an addict. This is about self-abandonment. This is about a lack of self-consideration. This is about doing all the things for all the people and then ending up feeling under-considered by others, even though we wrote the playbook on how it was going to be. So when I added high functioning to codependency with my clients, they were like, me, I'm the problem, it's me. Not to quote Taylor Swift, but I will.
Yeah.
And they could raise their hand without shame. They're like, I am high functioning. I am doing all the things for all the people. I am kind of low grade pissed off all the time. And I am feeling like people are entitled. So that was a nice shift. So why don't I'm going to give you my definition of codependency so that we all have like a working definition that we're talking about. According to me, it is when you are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the relationships, the finances, the careers, the situations of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace. So we're going to let the distinction settle.
It hit me.
Because, right, as HFCs, high functioning codependents, we love our people. Of course, we want them to be happy, have all the things. We love them. And the difference is when you are in recovery from being an HFC or when you are just simply empathic and compassionate, when your friend has a problem, you're like, I feel sympathy and compassion for my friend. I'm here for her. I hope she works it out. When you're at HFC, how quickly does your friend's emergency become your problem to fix? It is the exaggerated, the amplified sense of responsibility for other people that really makes us high-functioning codependents. And that is a different trip altogether. There is no weakness in this. There is no, because if we think of what are the myths or what are the things we think about when we think about codependency, and as you were saying and your therapist was saying, it's getting thrown around all over the interwebs. It's like the long-suffering woman sitting at home, waiting for the husband to bring home the paycheck, but he's out drinking it at the bar, right? Like these women are like, no, that's not me at all. I'm like a COO, I'm a CFO, I'm a pop star, I've had the gamut of clients. So changing the definition and realizing another thing about HFCs that makes us different is that we could become codependent with virtually anyone, meaning we become codependent plugged into our environment. So I'll give you a quick example. This is something that and this only happened about 5 years ago. So trust me, recovery isn't up and down for all the people, even when you read the book. It was a Saturday. I went into my hair salon in New York City, which I normally wouldn't go on Saturday because it's such a zoo, but I had to. So it's busy as hell. And I'm laying in the sink because they have some treatment on my hair. And now, because it's busy, the sink traffic is starting to line up, but I'm just laying there like an idiot doing nothing because I have to wait 10 minutes for my hair. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should tell the assistant that I could move so they could use the sink. So I hope she doesn't get in trouble because now there's a line. I wonder if someone's going to, like, this was some shit that had nothing to do with me. And I'm sitting here, what is the cost of being dialed in and feeling hyper responsible for what is happening in your environment, even when it's not your responsibility? Well, what I could have been doing instead of raising my cortisol in that moment, I could have called my mom. I could have listened to a podcast. I could have meditated. I could have done breathing exercises. I could have just rested my exhausted brain. But instead, I thought I had a better idea about how the sink flow should work at my hair salon. So I quickly do a video because it was really a revelation for me then, where I was like, you do this everywhere. It's not just here. I got into recovery in my relationships, but I was still codependently attached in my environments. I put up a video on YouTube and people were like, it went viral and people were like losing it, being like, oh my God, this is me everywhere. I can't be in a train. If someone has a problem, I'm like, I'll switch seats. Like I can't wait to volunteer and fix whatever problem is happening around me. And that is another symptom and it's exhausting.
It is. I completely agree with you. It is so exhausting to always be thinking about other people. And I'm a mother. I've got a little boy and a little girl, 7 and 9. And I think so much, especially about my daughter, right? Like, she's like, I'm helping, mommy. And I'm always like, that's a good thing, but I don't want her to feel like she always needs to be doing and thinking and pleasing and making people happy. So I'm just like, I'm also a millennial. So I'm overthinking parenting in the worst way possible.
Of course you are.
Trying to do it perfectly. But I totally relate to that feeling of being in that hair salon. That's what a powerful story. And I'm not surprised that went viral at all.
Here's the thing about having a different definition is that for so many people, this book has been out for 2 years now, and tens of thousands of people getting in touch saying it changed my life because I never would have saw myself in the problem, because herein lies the rub. The more competent you are, the less codependency looks like codependency, but it's still codependency. So we're still suffering. We're still feeling kind of pissed. We're still in pain, but nobody, at least nobody is like, I'm going to check in on Lisa. I hope she's okay. You know what? They know you're okay. Nobody's checking in on me because I'm the one checking in on everyone else. Nobody thinks, I hope Terri is okay. They don't think that. You know why? Because we've taught them how to treat us. And then we're mad when our relationships feel one-sided, because this is another experience of being in that codependent relationship, is that when you're active, you're sort of doing more of the work in the relationship. And I used to say this tongue in cheek, kind of kidding, but it was true, that in my 20s, I could take a perfectly competent boyfriend and turn that guy into an under-functioner in 2 weeks or less. But do you understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I absolutely do. And listen, I'm sure there are plenty of men that would happily step into that under-functioning role to have someone do all the work and all the labor and all the mental labor even. But yeah, that makes sense. That does make a lot of sense. How do these women, HFCs, how do they function in a relationship that is toxic and or abusive, which I really want to differentiate those two categories. But sometimes I think maybe, we're the perfect victim in many ways, right? Not playing the victim. I mean, truly a victim, but it's like, oh, perfect. You want to do everything? Great. Go ahead and do all of that. And then it's, we're exploited in a way that other people may not be.
So let's look at codependency, whether it's garden variety, like Melody Beatty, you're involved with an addict, or whether it's high functioning, what I've described. At the core of either one of those behavioral patterns is a covert or overt bid to control someone else's outcomes, someone else's feelings. So when you're in a toxic relationship and your partner's in a bad mood, you might be in a fine mood and they come home and then you're dancing as fast as you can to change their mood, whether it's let me make you a drink or do you want to have sex or let me anything to not sit with that mood. And especially, and taking it one step further, if it's an abusive relationship, that mood can then be threatening to what's going to happen for you later in that evening. So, there's real reasons we behave this way, but think about how often you're walking on eggshells in your relationship, right? Because this is an indication that you're managing the person that you're with. We walk on eggshells because of our hypervigilance. We are awake in every room. We are attuned to every person. Oh, there's a problem. I could be in a restaurant There could be a problem in like the back left corner. And I'll say to my husband's telling some story. I'm listening to that story halfway. And then halfway I'm saying, oh, there's a big brawl going to break out on the left-hand corner of this thing. I think we should get our food to go. Like, he's like, are you ever actually listening to me? I'm like, sorry. I'm also so dialed into what's happening around us. So how do you know if you're doing it? First of all, I think the first thing that anyone should do, if they're like, I don't know, like, I wonder, is it me? Is we're going to do a very quick resentment inventory. Super simple. You're going to bring to mind primary relationships in your life. And Lisa, I know, we all know. Who are we holding resentment for? Who do we feel underappreciated by? Who do we feel feels entitled to our sunshine? Who do we feel doesn't treat us the way that they should, or doesn't regard us, doesn't hold us in high esteem, maybe condescends, or whatever your resentment is? We're going to use the people in the situation, because you'll write them both down. Like, hey, it's my sister and I'm feeling resentful. I use this in one of the books, true story. Feeling resentful. When my sister and I both lived in New York City, we had each other's keys to each other's apartments, and we could go in. So we would have double the closet. We were the same size, so we would have double the closet. So my sister was like a pain and would like come and take stuff from my house and not tell me. And so then I'd be like packing to go somewhere and I couldn't find something, you know what I mean? And I was like, listen, I don't care what you take, just tell me, So that's a situation where I put, okay, I'm resentful. And then we go the next situation in person. Then the next one is, what is my 50% of that scenario? Well, with my sister, I never had an honest conversation about how much it bothered me. I mentioned it, I was sarcastic, I was kind of flippant, but I didn't actually say, hey, like, this bothers me so much that if you keep doing it, I'm going to take my key back, because that's really how I felt about it. And eventually I did have that conversation. She was like, okay, relax, drama. But then she no longer went to my house and took things without asking. Like, it made a difference, because in a lot of these scenarios, the way that I break down boundaries, right, is that, we're dealing with people, usually they're either a boundary first timer, they're a repeat offender, they're a boundary bully, or they're a boundary destroyer, which is more of the toxic, abusive, narcissistic personality, cluster B personality disorders, if you're a therapist, right? It's like those situations which we handle boundaries differently, right? So how I would approach a first timer, so if my sister, let's say I never had the honest conversation, I would have to approach her as a first timer, which means I got to take responsibility for what I want. I'd like to make a simple request that if you want to still have access to my closet, that you will let me know or ask me to borrow whatever it is before going there, or let me know that you did it at the very least. So that's what's required. Now, there'll be a different conversation if the person's a repeat offender. Then you add a consequence, like I did with my sister, said, hey, if you keep doing it, I'm going to have to take the key back, which sucks for both of us, because I still want to have double the closet, and I let you know when I'm going to your apartment. With boundary destroyers, and I think for this conversation, this is a helpful pivot, right? Let's pivot down that road of how do you have boundaries with people who are abusive? How do you have boundaries with people who are toxic or even simply difficult, right? And they're going to be different, but they're going to be similar in that we don't handle it the same. If you're dealing with someone who literally has a narcissistic personality disorder, their ability to care about how you feel and how their actions are impacting you is really small.
Yeah.
Like, they'll care because they don't want their supply to be cut off. They'll care because they still want to have sex with you. They'll care because how will it look at the club if we get a divorce? They'll care for all the wrong reasons. They're good at feigning compassion or feigning, I can't live without you, boo-hoo, right? But if you've ever been involved with anyone who has narcissistic tendencies or a real cold-blooded narcissist, you know that they don't have the capacity to feel your pain or to put themselves in your position, and they have no interest in doing so. So that's more of an access lens. We look at those relationships through the lens of how much access should this person get to my most tender heart? Are they emotionally trustworthy? If they're a narcissist, the answer is no, they are not. So it's less access. I always talk about this as like your VIP section. And, we get confused a lot of times, especially if you are codependent. We almost feel like we have to let everyone in to the VIP section of your life. So visualize it like a VIP section in a club. But the difference is that you're the bouncer. You make the guest list and you have to put up the velvet rope. Because if not, then just any mother effer can come in and just plop themselves down in a seat and take up your time, your energy, your bandwidth. And I think that if we bring it all the way back around, it's how do we value ourselves, right? When we are highly codependent, a lot of times there's this lack of self-worth where we get confused and feel like us being of service, our value is us being utilitarian. What are you gaining from me? I can be so helpful. I am so very clever. And the thing with high functioning codependents, and I know this because I've got a whole community of them, is that we are so smart, so capable, could figure out any problem, could get anything done. But a lot of times it is at the expense of ourselves. And so much of the work that I do is moving us towards what I call more self-consideration, because I think that talking about self-love sounds very trite. It's very not concrete. It's very like, if you just loved yourself more, it would all work out. Like, you want to be like, dude, that's so unhelpful. And what does it even mean? But I know what self-consideration means. Self-consideration means that you rest when you're tired, that you give yourself permission to change your mind, to make mistakes, to course correct when you need to, right? That's self-consideration is before you agree to one other thing in your life, this will be your new rule. You're going to ask yourself these two questions. Do I have the bandwidth to do this without becoming resentful? And number two is, do I even friggin' want to do it? Because so much of the time as codependent, that's never a consideration. We're like, but they want me to do it. So now apparently it's on my plate somehow.
Doesn't even occur to you that you could just be like, I don't actually have the capacity for that, you know?
Or maybe I don't like it.
Right. It matters so much. When people are at work, I think, maybe fear of saying no to a project, you're nervous you're going to get passed over for a promotion, whatever. But in the context of relationships, it's like, but I need to give, but I have to say yes. I'm not even sure if that's conscious. It's just a request is made and suddenly you find yourself doing it. It just it's automatic.
We call that the auto yes, actually. That's exactly what I write about. And what other things do we do as HFCs? Well, we have anticipatory planning, where when we're going to be with a difficult person, we're plotting out all the ways that we're going to handle whatever shit that could go down that we hope is not going to go down, but we are prepared in case it does. I used to have these two uncles. I would have Christmas Eve at my house, and they didn't talk to each other. And so for years, I would be like, my one sister, I'm like, you're with Uncle Bobby, you're with Uncle Jimmy. I got the booze that they like to drink. Instead of just being like, hi, you two grown-up idiots, if you can't figure it out, then neither one of you are coming to Christmas and goodbye. But when you're an HFC, it's almost like you really do think you know best and you really are capable. So you're like, I can do it. If you are the I got it girl, right? You're like, I got it, I got it, I got it. This is also part of that experience. But there's such a high cost. The reason we don't want to do it in this way, saying yes when you want to say no. I mean, listen, obviously, what ends up happening, you end up being bitter. But more than that, when we don't assert our preferences, just our preferences, simple preferences, when we say yes when we want to say no, what ends up happening in our lives is that the people who are supposed to know us the best don't really know us, because how can they? And how can anyone deeply love you if you never allow them to deeply know you because you're too busy managing them and the relationship and what will happen and how everyone feels and that everything is okay, like that's all we want. But the cost is so high because every single beautiful soul listening to this right now is so worth knowing.
People who are in these toxic and abusive relationships, which I think, the women that end up in those relationships are often, now that I'm, in reading this book, like too much and talking with you, these women that are high functioning codependents who end up in abusive relationships, a lot of this advice that you're giving and these stories that you're sharing are so applicable when you're out of the relationship and how to kind of start looking at the world differently and looking at yourself differently and how you show up. It matters so much for the healing part of it. I know for me, again, the phrase self-abandonment didn't even cross my brain at any point until I really was hit face first with, this is what you're doing and this is why this keeps happening and this is why you feel random resentment that you can't even quite place. And I don't know that I ever went through this exact exercise that you're talking about, but really thinking about like, who in my life do I overfunction for, with the exception of my children, And I'm happy to say that mostly they don't have that anymore because I don't want it. I'm not self-abandoning anymore. Now I say what I want. I always was able to at work, but never in relationships. It was like two different versions of me. Do you see
Very
that
common? Very
Yeah.
common.
Not just me. That's good.
Yeah.
Why is that? Let me ask you.
Well, part of it, I think, is that when you're masterful at something, there's a different relationship where if you are not recreating your original injuries at work, and a lot of us don't, we are, though, recreating those original injuries in relationships. And a lot of times we're recreating them in friendships. Some people do it at work, but I don't know exactly why, because I didn't either, right? For me, coming through this whole recovery process, I was always very successful. But part of it is when you're an HFC, you know how to manage systems. And you know, if you work enough, if you deliver enough, HFCs, and I can speak for myself, I would just work myself to death. But I knew if I was above reproach, if my stuff was so good, and if my willingness to be a part of the solution was so high, that especially work-wise, I would be valued. And that's actually true. And it's funny, that same premise doesn't actually translate to relationships. Because the more you overfunction, overgive, overdo, overfeel, have no self-consideration, the less respected you are in your relationship. So it doesn't work the same way.
That's a hugely, good distinction right there to make, because it's so true. I find if you're the I can do it kind of woman, you're going to be doing it all, right? You really, especially in the toxic abusive realm, people are willing to exploit that in you. They love that. It's one of their favorite qualities, is that you're willing to take the blame, take the responsibility. I'll do it. I'll manage it. One thing I hear a lot, this is so high-functioning codependent, and it's also a trope, right? And I see like couples accounts make skits on this, even of they're at a doctor, a dentist, a reception desk, and it's like, sir, you need to fill out this paperwork. And he's like, and hands it straight to his wife to do the paperwork. It's assumed I was that woman, like, okay, I'll do the paperwork. I'll make the appointment. I'll remind you. You end up treating your partner like a child. And then again, an abuser is happy to be treated that way in some respects because they want that over-functioning. It becomes your job, your role. And then if you have the audacity to step out of your role, you're harming them. You're the abuser. It's quite the flip.
Yeah, there's the Jarvo of it all, but there's something to really be said about thinking about. Another question that you guys could ask yourselves is, where am I doing things for others that they can and should be doing for themselves? And that includes children, right? Developmentally appropriate, right? So we're not making 4-year-olds wash their own clothes, but there is a lot of over-functioning, especially in the younger millennial generation of parents, where then you wonder why your kids don't have any skills, because you didn't let them get any skills. And how do we get skills? Another thing that I think would be really helpful, and this can be any conversation, because with HFCs, a lot of times we are the auto advice givers of the world too. So it can be anybody. I was completely indiscriminate in who I would give advice to. My mailman, anybody. I was friendly with all the people, and I knew what everyone should be doing in their lives. So that's a heavy burden for us to take on emotionally, even though you may be doing it automatically. You may not even think about it, but how quickly you feel responsible for coming up with an answer for someone who's in pain or someone who's struggling with something. So from here on in, everybody listening, and including you, is before you give any advice to anybody, even a child, the first question you're going to ask them is, okay, before I say anything, what do you think you should do?
I had to take a breath there. That is such good advice. That is such good advice. I think, when I speak to mom friends and things, and again, my kids are 7 and 9 for context, but most of my friends' children don't really have chores, like pick up after yourself, perhaps. But my kids are responsible for specific things in the house, age appropriate. And I've only been doing it for maybe 2 years. But I mean, like my 5-year-old was Windexing things, and loved it. They moved past the we love to help stage, let me tell you, but I'm teaching you skills and participation.
Yes.
You're not helping me, you're participating in the house. Get your own cutlery for dinner, get your own drink for dinner. And I know a lot of parents are like, we don't want the kerfuffle as we're plating things, go sit down. And I'm like, no, come in here and get your own drink and get your own cutlery. And now we're on dishwasher duty, and they don't like it, but
here's what you're giving them though, and you know it. Lise, you know it. That's why you're doing it, is that you are giving them small tasks daily that make them feel masterful, that make them feel good about themselves, that make them see, I can do something and I'm not doing it all wrong. Like I can do something. And it is a gift. It also, when we ask the question, what do you think you should do, whether you're talking to a 16-year-old or a 60-year-old, what you're doing is you're becoming more intimate with that person. Instead of trying to control them with advice, you're asking expansive questions. If they say, I don't know what I should do. All right, babe, but if you did know, what would it be? We're just brainstorming. Just whatever comes to your mind, say it, right? Because we're teaching them. And even with people who are used to you giving answers, and they may say, well, I just want to know what you think. And I'll always say, listen, I mean, I'm a psychotherapist. I give advice for a living. It's not like we're never going to weigh in. The important thing that is fixing the people in our lives cannot be the first stop on the bus if we want to have deeply reciprocal relationships.
I'm so connected to the idea that there are so many women that have left an abusive relationship, or prepare yourself if you're planning to leave. How can I show up differently next time? How can I change the relationship with my mother, my sister? Because, well, one thing we know, when you leave a relationship like this, often even very isolated, when you leave that relationship and you start to get healthy, you're working with a therapist, a coach, whatever, and you start to get healthy, your world gets smaller because you start to see there's people around you, not just the abuser that maybe you've left already, but your mom is a little dependent. And I don't mean codependent, I mean dependent on you to be doing everything, or your sister. And so I love this idea of like, where is the resentment, and asking people that. I think also there's something really nice about telling people in so many words, I have faith that you can figure this out. You're wording it better, but that's sort of like, I know that you can figure this out.
That's exactly right, though. And I always say that too, like, because I give scripts about because people are all like, well, what do I say? I've been auto advice giving forever. I don't know what to say instead. And part of what we say is, I believe in you. Your gut instinct is good. I have no doubt that you're going to figure this out because you're the only one who can. But I'm here to support. So let me know how I can best support you, which is different. And this is the message, especially with children, that we want to give. Because if we're so afraid of them failing that we rescue, we don't let them fail. Every time we are constantly giving them the answer, we're literally, subtext is saying, I don't think you can do it. I don't think you will make the right choice. So I have to make the right choice for you. And we're inadvertently centering everyone else's situation on us as the solution, which for me personally, it was so painful to realize, because I really had thought of myself more like Mother Teresa. I was like, I'm just a lover. I just want to help all these people. I'm just so loving. And in therapy, to have the truth of my behavior be revealed through a situation where one of my sisters was in an abusive relationship, living in a shack in the woods in upstate New York in the winter with no running water and no heat. She was an active alcoholic. He was a drug user and abusing her. I couldn't do anything else but think about how am I getting her out of there, right? That was my whole thing. I need to save her. I'm going to save her. And finally, I was crying and talking to my therapist, and I was like, what am I going to do? I've done everything. It's not working. And she said, Terri, what makes you think you know what Jenna needs to learn in this life? And I was like, I think we can both agree she doesn't need to do it with a crackhead who beats her in the woods. And she was like, no, I can't agree because I'm not God and I don't know. But do you know what's happening for you? And I was like, obviously, no idea. So help. And she said, you've worked really hard to create a harmonious life. You've had a lot of therapy, you've become a therapist, and your sister's dumpster fire is really messing with your peace. And you really want to have that be tied up in a neat bow so you can get back to your life. And I was like, but is that so wrong? And she's like, Terri, I'm not telling you shouldn't save Jenna. I'm telling you can't. Like, it's literally not possible. And what you're really doing by sending her money and all the things you're doing is you're probably prolonging her staying in this situation because she's not reaching the rock bottom that would motivate her to leave. So she taught me about boundaries. I told my sister, hey, I can't talk to you about this anymore. I love you. And I cannot listen to you talking about this abusive situation. But if you ever want to leave, I will always be your person. And like 9 months later, she was like, are you still my person? I was like, of course I am. I went and got her. She got sober. There's a whole thing. But what we rob people of when we think it's our job, right? If I had quote unquote saved her, her baby sister, saving her does nothing for her self-esteem. It makes her feel like crap. Instead, she got to save herself, get sober, and got all of the self-confidence that comes from that experience. So inadvertently, we're robbing people of the experiences they need to have. And we were mistaking it for love. At least I was.
I think that's very common in these, in a lot of these situations. Absolutely. Tell me where you see this kind of show up where maybe the person wouldn't have been considered high functioning codependent, broadly speaking, throughout their life, but in an abusive relationship, they sort of become this. Do you see it as sometimes it can be conditioned from a relationship?
Yeah, especially if you're a conflict avoidant, especially if you're a people pleaser. You can be taught that to avoid negative feedback, have dinner ready at 6 or do what this person wants. Like you can, especially if you get sucked into a relationship with the narcissist, because we know there's this beginning of the relationship, there's the love bombing, there's the whirlwind of like, well, this is too good to be true, which of course, hello, it is. But then we're now chasing that high. We're chasing that, what it was like. We're chasing that person that they never really were and they're never ever going to actually be. But what we're really doing is we want to avoid the negative feedback, and it can become your whole life. And that is, instead of responding, that's us endlessly reacting. What can I do to avoid this person's wrath or this person's rejection or this person's judgment? So I do feel like it can be conditioned. It can also be, in the book, in Too Much, I write about your high functioning codependency blueprint, meaning like what are the things that happen in your life, in your family of origin? You may be an HFC, as we call it, from a long line of HFCs, right? If you learned in your home that, like you said, your partner, your husband hands you the paperwork and you do it because that's your position, that's your job, that's your value. You've come by it honestly. But why I ask you all of these very specific questions when you're breaking down your HFC blueprint is because we're taking information from the basement, which is your subconscious mind, and we're bringing it up to the main part of the house. So you can say, like, that's how it was for my folks, or that's how it was for people who came before me. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's how it has to be for me. I had to reject in my own family of origin. There was kind of a lot of male bashing. My parents got divorced. There was a whole thing. And I had to consciously reject, like, men are inferior, and have faith. I could meet someone who I could really be friends with and partner with and want to be intimate with and all of those things. But it was scary because I was getting excommunicated a little bit from the group to change my mind. And they dealt with it and it was okay. But this is stuff that if we don't consciously find it, look for it and question it, it just becomes our lives. And we're like, oh, this is just life. This is just relationships. But that's not necessarily true. We actually have a lot of choices that sometimes we may not be aware of.
I know, especially in an abusive relationship, honestly, even with a family member, but I suppose I mean a partner. And in the context that I work, I'm normally thinking of a woman who is the victim of abuse and the man who's the perpetrator, though I recognize that's not always the case. But there's a safety factor sometimes, So it's codependency might not feel like the right, label for some people because they could be hit, killed, screamed at, abandoned, all these feelings, and it's truly unsafe. And I want to separate those two things because that's kind of a different level of this. But I love this, how to just show up differently with people who are at least not straight up abusive, not unsafe, meaning you're at physical risk. But I know there's a lack of emotional safety in a lot of these relationships. So it's terrifying to stop being codependent and then people are going to abandon you or reject you, or it makes you selfish. It makes you a bad person in your mind. You have that belief. It's hard.
Or they may say that, right? Like when you think about it, Dr. Harriet Lerner talks about relationships as dances. And it's like, I do this and you do that. When you start to get into recovery from being a high-functioning codependent or a codependent, you're changing your dance moves. And the people you dance with are going to notice. So expect that there'll be pushback and remind yourself that you are not that fragile. And again, as Lisa said before, we're making a direct line distinction between being in a relationship that might be difficult, that might be unsatisfying, that might not be what you want it to be, and a relationship where there's any danger. So if there is danger, then everything you do has got to be with your safety as your top priority. And I understand being trauma bonded. And I know people are like, well, just get out, like it's so easy. And I know that it's not. But I also know, being a psychotherapist for almost 30 years, that it's possible too. And that there are lots of ways that you can slowly but surely make a safe exit plan. I actually have something on my website, and I've done a podcast, how to safely leave an abusive relationship. I've got 800 videos on YouTube. I've got 10 years worth of a podcast. Like, I have a million free resources for anyone who needs them. But the most important thing, if you are in a dangerous situation, is that you do not broadcast what your intention is. That everything you do, you keep it super, super tight. Don't tell a lot of people. Maybe only tell one trusted person. Get legal advice if you are legally entangled with this person, whether you're married or whether you own things together. Like, you have to be incredibly aware of the danger. And abusers, of course, become more dangerous, especially as they energetically feel like they're losing their grip. So you really don't want to start asserting boundaries about things that don't matter, especially if you have a plan to leave. It's sort of like leave the status quo slowly but surely. I was just interviewing someone yesterday. She was talking about her best friend. It took a year, and then she had her go bag. He was out. She could do it. And like, she had everything in place to go secret, to block him everywhere, to like, there's a whole way of doing it. But if you're listening and you feel alone and you're in that situation, there are so many resources to help you. And I understand the fear. It might make sense to buy a second phone. And maybe that's the one that you call a helpline with. Like, there's disposable phones that are not that expensive. Like, really, really think about yourself. What do you want for yourself? You might have children. And there's so many places where there's support to do it. But I think the distinction is really important. So don't feel like, well, I'm weak because I can't set boundaries with this person, or I can't stop anticipating their needs. No, you're doing what you need to do to stay out of harm's way to the best of your ability. And that is righteous. That is important. And that is your job, especially if you have kids. But you don't deserve to be abused. So be clear that next right action after next right action. Don't think further. Don't think that you're behind. Just next right action after next right action. And you can know something like, I know for sure I need to get the F out of here, and still not do anything, right? So I say this because the denial that people put themselves in so much in my therapy practice and my groups and my courses is because they fear that if I know it, then I must change it right now. So what I say is, you can know it and do nothing. But I want you to have your eyes wide open for yourself. When it's just you and you know if you're in an abusive relationship. You know if you should get out, even if you can't right now. No shame, no judgment, right? But the knowing is very important, because once we sort of admit to ourselves like, hey, this is not sustainable, somewhere energetically you're putting your stake in the ground and you're inviting the universe to conspire in your favor to figure this out. And I've helped zillions of women do it, and I know that Lisa does as well, and that you can figure it out. Just one next right action at a time.
I love that. Like, what an absolutely perfect thing to say. I know, I appreciate any therapist who understands trauma bonding and the difficulties, because, maybe it's not therapists that are using the just leave kind of language, although sometimes, but it is hard. But don't practice these things in that relationship. But you can still get this book. You can still learn about high functioning codependency. You can still learn about better boundaries and practice them with other people if you're
Correct.
not with the abuser, and start learning about it, because you're building this ability. You're flexing that muscle to be able
Yes.
to leave. And you have to start somewhere. People always ask, can I, in my case, break a trauma bond, but can I break a trauma bond while I'm still in the relationship? It's a little bit harder, but yes, you can learn better boundaries in a relationship too. You just can't necessarily practice them with that person. But we all know lots of people. So practice it with someone a little bit more safe. And then you'll start to build up that confidence, like, hey, I deserve this. And I can tell you, obviously, you know this too from personal experience, it feels so good to say no sometimes in the most kind way. Just, I don't have the capacity for that. I can't actually take that on. I have faith that you can figure this out. I love that. And even the framing of it is such a positive thing for other people, to not take their power away from them by acting like you're the most necessary piece of the puzzle.
Right. And it's a relief, because the liberation that comes from being like, wow, this is my side of the street and that is someone else's side of the street. I thought I had to clean the whole neighborhood, so I only have to worry about what is actually my responsibility. Wow, that is such a lightening of the load. And this is where now you'll have more bandwidth to be able to have more self-consideration, self-care, daily acts of self-care that really will fill up your bucket in a different way. Because most HFCs, when we're active, we are just existentially exhausted, emotionally and physically.
Gosh, that's true. The exhaustion. Oh man, that's a whole other episode. I tell you, the end is just, I felt
so real.
I felt like I lost 280 pounds when I escaped my abusive relationship. I suddenly, you have one less child to take care of in many ways. So it's nice to step into feeling independent, feeling like you can take care of yourself, and it's not necessary to take care of everyone around you and do everything. Give yourself a break. That's
yes, please.
That's the message. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I really hope that people read your books, because I hear anytime you bring up the word codependency, oh yeah, I've read Codependent No More, like it's the only book. And again, no shade to the book or the author. I'm just saying there's so much other content out there, and I really, really want people to read Too Much.
Yes, I love it. Also, if they're trying to figure out their boundaries, I have a free boundary quiz that people love. I think I've had 80,000 people go through it. So just go to boundaryquiz.com and it'll tell you what your archetype is. And then I have a whole video telling you things that you can do to have better boundaries based on your answers. It's only 13 questions, but it's actually a very effective quiz. Making a quiz is way harder than I thought it was. I did it a bunch of years ago, but it took about a year to make the quiz actually work. And I also do have that course, that the high functioning codependency course that is starting, and people can get that information if they're interested at terricole.com/BTC for Break the Cycle.
Amazing. I'm going to link all of that in the description too, to make it really easy for people to access you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much for your work, and thank you for having me.